Welcome to the programme. It's only 8 years since China's President Xi Jinping received a standing ovation after addressing Australia's Parliament to pledge a new era of cooperation after signing a free trade deal. Since then, diplomatic relations with our biggest trading partner have significantly soured. And from the South China Sea to the Pacific Islands, China is now flexing its might in ways that challenge the existing order. The biggest flashpoint remains Taiwan. In a rare press club address last month, China's ambassador to Australia, Xiao, was asked about the very real prospect of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
We are waiting for a peaceful unification, but we can never rule out our option to use other means. So when necessary, when compelled, we are ready to use all necessary means. As to what does it mean by all necessary means, you can use your imagination.
The ambassador joins me now. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. We just heard a grab of yours from the press club where you said that China was prepared to use all necessary means. That sounds like a warning to Taiwan. What do you mean exactly when you say use your imagination?
Well, it is a warning. Yeah, it is a warning in reaction to what has happened in Taiwan because of the Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. And it was a message to those outside forces who are trying to support one China, one Taiwan, or two Chinas, and also a warning to the so-called Taiwan independent secessionists that the China is determined to protect their sovereignty and integrity.
Does all necessary means mean a full-scale, potentially a full-scale military invasion of Taiwan?
Well, sorry, actually, if you look at the anti-secession law, which was adopted in 2005 by the National People's Congress, Article 8 has a very clear articulation about the three kinds of scenarios we will use on peaceful means.
But the question was, does that also mean a full-scale military invasion of Taiwan is possible?
Well, Sarah, I would not use the word invasion. Taiwan is part of China. And the invasion is for, the relations between nations.
What exactly would compel China to use forces to take back Taiwan?
Three scenarios. It's been articulated in the anti-secession law. In the event, number one, the so-called Taiwan independent secessionists would act in a way, in whichever way, that would lead to Taiwan's secession from China. And scenario B, in the event that a major incident happens that would entail the secession of China from China, the secession of Taiwan from China. Number three, the possibilities for peaceful unification should be completely exhausted. That's when we will start.
The way you describe that, it's as if you are waiting for something to happen. The question is really about whether you will decide to invade or to take Taiwan back by force of your own volition, not in response to something that the people of Taiwan may do.
Well, Sarah, the policy of the Chinese government is for peaceful unification. We've been talking a lot about the other choices, but that's not the policy. The policy is for peaceful reunification. That's why we've been so patiently waiting for more than 7 decades. We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options. If we keep the other options, we have a chance of peaceful reunification. Otherwise, it just leads things to, nowhere.
Or somewhere, as you suggested in your press club address. Your colleague, the ambassador in Paris, says the Taiwanese people, in the event of Taiwan returning to China, that the Taiwanese people will need to be re-educated, is the phrase that he used. You talk about them needing a process to have a correct understanding of China, and I quote you there. How would you go about correcting the thoughts of millions of people who've grown up used to free thinking?
Well, there are 1.4 billion people in China, and the 23 million people in Taiwan are part of the Chinese population. And as a citizen of this country, each and everyone is obliged to learn about the basic knowledge about this country.
That's not what re-education means. Re-education, as you know, in Chinese history has some sinister connotations. The question is, how do you go about re-educating people who have been used to free thought?
Well, like people in this country, they have to learn English language, learn the history about Australia. That's their obligation. There's no question about forcing someone to receive education. So I would not use the word re-education. It carries a very complicated meaning.
Clearly, there's no comparison between the notion of forced re-education and what happens in a free country and what happens in Australia. Why do you think it's so important that everyone thinks the same way?
Well, in China, people are supposed to learn the Chinese language, otherwise you cannot communicate. And people in every country, they have to learn their national language. This is a question of obligation, not a question of a compulsory, not a question of force.
The most recent example of large-scale re-education, and that's the phrase that your colleague in France used, re-education, that is forcing people to a new way of thinking. The most recent example of that, of course, large-scale re-education is in the Xinjiang, in Xinjiang. And as you know, the UN has published a report very recently that says what happened in the camps there was arbitrary detention, torture, cruel or degrading treatment, and may constitute crimes against humanity. Should China be ashamed of what happened in Xinjiang?
So we're talking about the two issues. First one about the re-education. Let me say this. For the 23 million people in China, they are Chinese citizens. And when they are...
Sorry, you mean 23 million in Taiwan, do you mean?
23 million in Taiwan. They are Chinese citizens. So when Taiwan is reunited together with the motherland, and they will receive the education, they will be together with the other 1.4 billion Chinese people. And there's no need for us to either re-educate or educate in a different way. This is a part of the program.
We'll come back to Xinjiang in a minute. Hold on, I just want to say this because let me just say this because
for those secessionists,
yes,
it's not a question of re-educate. They are going to be punished according to the law. They've been involved in splitting Taiwan from China. So it's not a question of education or re-education. They will be punished according to law.
You're talking about widespread punishment of the people of Taiwan?
No. Those only handful of people who have been stubborn to pursuing a Taiwan independence.
Just to be clear, it's obvious from polls that have been taken in Taiwan since 1993, I think, that the majority of Taiwanese support the status quo.
Well, opinion polls are very complicated. You know, you have opinion polls for one, and actually what has happened turned out to be just the opposite. Look at the federal elections 3 years ago. Look at the election in the United States. So opinion poll sometimes doesn't tell the facts.
An opinion poll that goes between 1993 and the present day that constantly produces the same result is likely to be more reliable. But I think we should move on to Xinjiang because it's very important. Separating it from the Taiwan question of re-education. In terms of what happened in Xinjiang, according to the UN, I'll just repeat, torture, cruel or degrading treatment, arbitrary detention. Crimes against humanity. Should China be ashamed of what happened in Xinjiang?
So I will quote you from the report, the so-called report. I didn't read the report, but let me say this.
Did it stir in you any feelings of shame or revulsion?
No, not at all, because that's absolutely fabrication. That's absolutely fabrication. Let me say this. The former High Commissioner for Human Rights, she paid a visit to China last May. She visited many places in Xinjiang and some other parts in China and had a good meeting with President Xi. She said, after the visit, that she appreciates the efforts by the Chinese government in protecting human rights, poverty elevation, economic and social development, multilateralism, climate change, and everything. So that was her statement. And now we have a second report. We have a second statement. There's a report. Because her statement was not satisfying in some of the countries, like, for example, to be openly speaking, the United States and their client states, they were not happy. So under their pressure, she compromised and agreed for a report. This is a second report. This second report is a product of manipulation and cohesion.
Well,
it's nothing true in it. There's nothing true in it.
Foreign Minister,
it's over over 10,000 miles away from the truth. So,
Foreign Minister, let me just say this to you. Foreign Minister Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister of Australia, is in no doubt about the credibility of the report. She says the human rights violations described are harrowing, and that Australia will consult countries around the world on how best to respond to its devastating findings. Will China punish Australia if they go down that path?
Well, the spokesperson from my embassy made a remark in reaction to the foreign minister's statement regarding the so-called report on China's Xinjiang.
Penny Wong, our foreign minister, I'm just going to repeat this. She is in no doubt about the credibility of the report nor its findings that widespread human rights abuses took place in Xinjiang. So will you punish Australia if they find concerted action to respond to that report? You've done it before when we've
As ambassador, I'm not going to suggest to punish Australia for making their statements. Australia is entitled to their own views. But I'm going to suggest that Australia should check against the facts before make serious statements.
I think the foreign minister said that she had read the report and she had come to her own conclusions. As I said, she found that its findings were harrowing. In the past, when Australia stepped forward and talked about the need for an inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus, we were punished for that. Is there a danger that if we act in concert with other nations in response to this devastating report, that you will seek to punish us again?
Well, I wouldn't call it a punishment. If you talk about the source of the coronavirus, it was a strong reaction from the Chinese public that someone in this country was implying to say that it was Chinese military laboratory who created the COVID-19 virus and by mistake leaked it to the market and causing the pandemic in Wuhan, in Hubei province, in all of China, and to the rest of the world. That was simply not true. So there's no punishment. This is just a reaction. At
the same time, Penny Wong praised the courage of the Australian Uyghur community and those around the world for making sure that these stories, these harrowing stories, came to light. Do you regard these ordinary folks as enemies of China?
No. Those who were Uyghurs who were outside China, they used to be Chinese compatriots. They used to be our citizens. Yeah. They are either being misled or they're being re-educated by certain secessionist forces outside of China. So they've been trapped in an impasse that's leading them to nowhere. I hope they will eventually come to realize that their home is in China, and they are Chinese citizens, and Chinese government cares about their interests.
On the subject of people imprisoned by the state for its own reasons, why hasn't detained Australian citizen Cheng Lei been able to call her children for 2 years?
Well, Chen Lei's case is very special in the sense that she's in charge of transmitting national security information overseas.
That's the allegation against her.
That's the truth. Yeah,
that's the charge.
We have evidence then before we put her into custody, and now it's still in the judicial procedure.
Subject to criminal proceedings yet, though. She hasn't had the evidence tried in court, has she?
Oh, the trial is going on. Trials are going on because it's relating to something like national security. So it's conducted in a way it's not open to the public. It doesn't mean there's no evidence. There's evidence.
Is it still proper that this woman, who is a mother of 2 children, mother of children, hasn't been able to speak to them for 2 years?
Well, the Australian diplomats in China can get access to almost every week.
Is that the same as a mother?
They know where she is.
Is that the
they
same
know
as
how she is.
Forgive me for interrupting. Is that the same as a mother speaking to her children? And
that's different. That's different. Yeah, personally, I have sympathy to her family, her kids, and their relatives that they are facing such a difficult situation.
Is there something that you can do to ensure there is some contact between Cheng Lei and her children?
Well, in case of the procedure in the jurisdiction, the government we have not much we can do. But on the humanitarian basis, I've been trying to see if I can be helped as ambassador to facilitate a possible much easier access, either between her and her relatives or her. The Australian embassies, based on humanitarian considerations.
I want to ask you
this. But I cannot get involved with the legal procedure.
I want to ask you this. China hasn't always been intolerant of different thinking inside the country. In the 1980s, under the leader Deng Xiaoping, Taiwan, for example, was offered reunification on the basis of one country, 2 systems, in which the island would be able to maintain some autonomy. one country, two systems? Is it no longer correct thought?
It still is. Our policy towards Taiwan is one country, two system. There's a recent, very latest version of the white paper on Taiwan question. It says very clearly, we're for a one country, two system should we have a peaceful reunification. One country, China, two system, the mainland, we have socialist countries. It would be very difficult
for the people of Taiwan to have faith in that in the light of Hong Kong. But I need to move on because we do have a limited amount of time, so forgive me for this. We understand that President Xi will soon be elevated to an unprecedented third term. That will make him the most powerful leader since Mao. Now, President Xi at that point will be both party leader and head of the Central Military Commission. Now, we just spoke of Deng Xiaoping. He laid out some rules in a famous speech in the 1980s. He said it's not good to have an over-concentration of power. It's not good to have people holding two or more posts. These were rules to prevent the rise of another leader like Mao. When did those rules of Deng Xiaoping become redundant?
Well, Sarah, President Xi is not only the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party and the chairman of the Central Military Commission. He's also the president of the People's Republic of China.
And that's exactly what Deng Xiaoping was arguing against.
Yeah, you missed that.
Over-concentration of power.
Yeah, you missed that. Over the past 10 years, ever since President Xi came into the central government and central leadership, we have seen a very, very successful story of China's political stability, social harmony, economic development. So many things have achieved over the past 10 years, much more dramatic than the previous several decades. So there's a wide range of support among the Chinese public to support such a great, wise leadership. So you won't be surprised that this support will continue.
So does that mean that Deng was wrong, that leader Deng was wrong in saying that there shouldn't be a concentration of power in one person?
Well, we're talking about two persons, Mr. Deng Xiaoping and President Xi Jinping. They are two persons. And these are two different ages, different eras. We're now in a new era.
That philosophy is now rejected.
What philosophy?
The philosophy of Deng Xiaoping is rejected.
Well, I think it's for the Chinese people to make decisions.
You've talked about the potential for a meeting between Prime Minister Albanese and President Xi. Can that happen without any preconditions? Or do you expect Australia to change the way that it talks about Australia? It's a line that you've used a number of times that you don't like, the way that Australia talks about China. For that meeting to happen between our Prime Minister and Premier Xi, does Australia need to change the way it talks? Will there be conditions?
Well, I think for the top leaders of two countries to meet, we have to make sure that it's going to be a constructive one instead of a destructive one. Sometimes, it happened that after the meeting at the top level, the things goes further deteriorated. So what I would like to see is that we have some favorable atmosphere to be created, and so that when time comes, when the condition, not precondition, but conditions are ready, when there's really a wish and will from both sides, I'd love to see a top-level meeting between two countries.
The will is clearly there, but will you put conditions on Australia's behaviour if it's going to go ahead?
Nobody should set preconditions for the other side.
And what about it in this current moment when we have Australia's reaction to the report about Xinjiang and what happened there? As I said, those words, torture, crimes against humanity.
It's very unfortunate. The
you
report was not based on facts. You stand alone in the world
in relation to the UNHCR, to the High Commission on Refugees. Is it still possible for the improvement in relationships to continue with that stark disagreement about Xinjiang?
Well, I think we'll look at the two issues. One is the overall bilateral relation between our two countries. I've been keeping in touch and comparing notes with our colleagues in DFAT and trying to see how we can move forward. We have a good momentum, but we need to keep the momentum. If we don't keep the momentum, we might lose the momentum. We're just like sailing against the torrent. Either we are moving forward or we are falling back. But for the question of the Xinjiang, as I said, I don't want to get debating into the detail because the report itself is a product of manipulation. It's 10,000 miles away from the truth. There's no sense in it, of truth in it. I hope that the Australian government would be serious to check against the facts before make public statements.
Clearly a point of considerable disagreement, but in the meantime, thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Sarah.